Hello and welcome. My name is Roger Quayle, and you are listening to My Life in the Mosh of Ghosts. Hello there, and welcome back to My Life in the Mosh of Ghosts with me, your host, Roger Quayle, and thank you for joining me. For today's episode, I'm doing 2 gigs for the price of 1, and we're back down in London at the end of February in 1981. These gigs represent my first encounter with Americans, and how exotic and interesting they seemed to a young lad like me from Sheffield. So, here we go. It's the Taking Liberties gig at the Rainbow Theatre, starring the Bongos and Bush Tetras, on the 20th of February. And then the following day, it's the Love of Life Orchestra at Dingwall's. Hey ho, let's go. Sunday afternoon, and a car crash at the junction of Belgrave Road and Warwick Gardens. There are shouts, a crumpled thud as Traffic Island halts forward, and a loud smack as I headbutt the windscreen. Hard enough to spiderweb the glass. Any greater impact and I'd be dining on tarmac and hospital food. Or worse. Riding shotgun. No seatbelt. Stupid lad. Thank God you've got a big soft head. Flick the pages back to Friday, and the weekend is full of promise. DVA are back down in London to remix our songs 4 Hours and Sensorium for single release on Fetish Records. It's Friday afternoon, and Rod Pierce's tiny flat on Denby Street, which doubles up as Fetish HQ, is abuzz with American accents. Rod's US signings, the Bongos, are over from New York for their first UK show. Part of a 5 US band showcase entitled Taking Liberties at the Rainbow Theatre in Finsbury Park. Also hanging out are a couple of members of the Bush Tetras playing on the same bill. The Bongos, Richard, Rob and Frank, are excited to be in the land of the Beatles and the Stones, and also to check out all the new bands and clubs in London. Their buzz is slightly tempered by the jet-lagged fuzziness of the Bush Tetras. Apart from Zen bin man Zev, these are my first Americans. Better still, my first New Yorkers. Everyone is cool. De Niro cool, Pacino cool, easygoing, self-assured. They've seen television, one of my favourite bands, like 20 times. No big deal. Leather jackets, Converse sneakers, Cuban heels. Even their shoes are cool. I share a minicab up to Finsbury Park with Richard from the Bongos. Message of Love by the Pretenders plays on the radio. He's a lovely guy. More Richie Cunningham cool, I decide. Originally from Florida, he's thrilled to be in London, playing at the world-famous Rainbow, treading the same boards as Bowie, The Who, T-Rex and The Clash. The Rainbow, formerly the Astoria Cinema, is huge. Football terrace barriers have replaced the seats downstairs, and it's a long hike up to the vertiginous circle, where you'd need a telescope rather than opera glasses to see the action on the distant stage, which is framed by a plywood and plaster reproduction of a Moorish palace, complete with castellated columns and fake palm trees. Exploring further, Richard and I find our way out onto the roof. It's a cold blue sky day, and I'm on top of the world with my new American friend. This feels good. Perhaps some of his innate coolness will rub off on me. Richard goes off to get ready. Back downstairs, in the sloping auditorium, I find Genesis Pcaeldries from Throbbing Gristle. We lean on a barrier and take in this peculiar clash of football and theatre, like waiting to take a look at Real Betis's new striker, Othello. Jen charms me with tales about the Hells Angels back up in Hull, and the origins of Throbbing Gristle. I decide he's the nicest wrecker of civilization I've ever met. News of this US New Wave invasion hasn't travelled far. There are maybe 300 of us in this 3,000 capacity room. They'd have been better off in the Clarendon, although I can see why London's legendary Rainbow Theatre plays better with the promoters than a pub in Hammersmith. It's bloody freezing when the bongos go on, and as Richard sings, his breath condenses, his own personal dry ice machine. I like them, a lean power pop trio, combining the breezy optimism of the Loving Spoonful with the neurotic tics of Talking Heads. Richard is the cheery frontman, a cherub-cheeked McCartney on a borrowed guitar, relishing the moment. They are joined on stage by Genesis, Cozy and Chris from TG, plus D-Pop from the Bush Tetras. In the Congo is a warped tribal collision of joyful pop and atonal racket, which actually gets us moving. Anything to keep the creeping frostbite at bay. At least, that's how I remember it. Here's Richard Barone, with his memories of those days in London and that gig. Over to you, Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Barone, and thank you, Roger, for asking me to say a few words about the Bongos and our first trip to London, which was to play at the Rainbow Theatre for Taking Liberties. It was such an exciting time in London at that time. We felt it and we knew it. And as much as I was always an Anglophile and still am, and as much as I have heroes that came from the London scene of the past, we were way more interested in what was happening at that moment in the beginning of the 80s. We knew that there were a lot of bands we wanted to meet and to see while we were there, and we were thrilled to meet you and Constructabeat and Throbbing Gristle and the others, and performing at the various clubs that we played at, like Dingwall's, and we did like 5 or 6 shows, I believe, in London besides the Rainbow. So we were just consumed with that and being in that moment, and not so much with even thinking about the past, just knowing that it had existed and there was a past that had sort of forged our musical sensibility was kind of enough, I think. And we didn't have to kind of go sightseeing to Abbey Road or anything like that, or retrace Mark Boland's steps. It was more about like being in that moment and living it and doing everything that we could do and meeting everyone that we could meet. The concert itself at the Rainbow was exciting because it was by far the largest stage we had played on so far. At that point, we had been playing just in small clubs, basically in the New York region. I don't think we had even toured in the United States yet. So that was a theater, and it was exciting, just to be on a big stage. Unfortunately, I broke a string on my guitar on the very first song, which completely threw me off, and I had to borrow a very alien Stratocaster. I played a Rickenbacker, and I had to borrow from Pat Irwin of the Raybeats his Stratocaster, which was a whole different thing. And so for most of the concert, I was trying to deal with that. And then, of course, we were joined on stage by 3 members of Throbbing Gristle, and that was actually such a thrill to have Genesis and Cozy and Chris join us for the song In the Congo, which became sort of a mashup of their song Discipline, which was their current single. And it was, very cool, very cool moment. But yeah, we mostly were just concerned with the moment that we happened to be in. It was really fun for us as a new band to get the press coverage that we did in London and, to get around and play those various places. But for me, the best memories are of just hanging out with the friends that we had met there and just being in London at that time and going to clubs and seeing other bands and just being part of it. That was the biggest thrill of all.
Thank you, Richard. A delight to hear from you. Of the other bands, the sleazy surf and sax of the Ray Beats, the birds-like jangle of the DBs, and the retro frat rock of the Fleshtones, it's the Bush Tetras who stand out for me. Their somnambulant, ghostly presence at Fetish earlier in the day suddenly makes sense. These people are allergic to daylight. Come sundown, put them on stage, plug them in, and they come to life. 3 girls who dress like tomboys, plus a drummer boy on tom-toms. This epicene combo thrive on a paranoid, detuned funk throb. A bit like the Slits, if the Slits came from the Lower East Side rather than Ladbroke Grove. Bush Tetras are not easy to fathom, and they're not here to put on a show. Nonetheless, they effortlessly convey a kind of skulking NYC scuzziness I've only ever seen in the movies. And in case we didn't get the message, they carve up John Lennon's cold turkey with a sallow dread that confirms that they didn't come to London to be snapped on the zebra crossing at Abbey Road. Saturday morning, and I wake up nylon sheets crackling in my £8 a night hotel room in Pimlico, just around the corner from Fetish. Single servings of marmalade scraped onto cold toast is the only sound in a morgue-like breakfast room. This is London. No one talks to each other, especially not in the morning. Charlie Collins arrives down from Sheffield, and we go record shopping. First, the Virgin Megastore on Oxford Street, and then Charlie takes me to the jazz palaces of Dobell's on Charing Cross Road and Collett's on Shaftesbury Avenue. Buying records in London can be a bit of a hit and miss affair. The imperious staff behind the counter aren't inclined to let you listen to anything before you decide to buy it, so you end up taking a chance on new things, sometimes informed by nothing more than a few words in the NME, or something you heard on John Peel, or maybe just a good-looking sleeve. Sometimes it feels like the record doesn't actually exist, like the James Chance soundtrack to Grutzy Elvis, which is so scarce it might as well be pressed on unicorn poo. It's rewarding when you get it right. Queen of Siam by Lydia Lunch, or the eardrum-threatening Holland Tunnel Dive by Implog, and disappointing when you get it wrong. Like the first Defunct album. Great sleeve, forgettable jams. Another of these bands we've read a bit about in the NME and Time Out, but have not actually heard, is Love of Life Orchestra. They're a bit like Material apparently, also out of New York, and they're playing at Dingwall's in Camden tonight. Look at me, out ligging in London, 2 nights in a row. I'm still bathing in the afterglow of DVA's triumphant gig at the Lyceum a couple of weeks ago. Here I am, strutting around Dingwall's, wearing my DVA button badge, desperate for someone to recognise me. Last night's Rainbow gig mostly felt like an exercise in flicking through rock's well-thumbed pages while wearing new wave shades. I don't blame the bands. In a modern US musical landscape dominated by Billy Joel and REO Speedwagon, looking back to the counterculture cool of the 1960s for inspiration appears to be a neat way to sidestep the mainstream. However, here tonight is some new American music which is forward-looking and funky to boot. That's a small orchestra, notes Charlie dryly. He's got a point. They're a 4-piece, drums, bass, guitar, and a multitasking synth and sax. In fairness, while Love of Life Quartet might be more pedantic, it wouldn't do justice to the bold ambition and scale of this music. Free-flowing but disciplined, flashing vibrantly but never flashy for the sake of it. Tight like the snare drum, which is cracking at cochlear-crushing volume a few feet away from me. I'm stood front and centre, marvelling at the interplay between the band. It's all instrumental, galloping drums and walking bass lines that seem to stretch the length of Broadway. The guitarist seems to be at ease in any style, from funkadelic to Fred Frith, and the balding, bespectacled guy on synth and sax appears to be the polymath calling the shots, which ricochet around Dingwalls at acute, appealing angles. Musicianship of this calibre is still somewhat frowned upon in the UK, punk having put the mockers on anything that resembles virtuosity. But this band are the missing link between chic and Chick Corea, a cerebral disco feeding the head and feet. In love with life, in love with music. Love of Life Orchestra's jagged jazz dance innovations are still ringing in my head when it hits the pillow back in Pimlico. And I'm pleased to say I have not one but two guests from New York City this week. And here, with some reflections on touring in Europe back in the early 80s, is Peter Gordon from the Love of Life Orchestra. Over to you, Peter.
Dingwalls, February 1981, London, Love of Life Orchestra. I was on organ and sax, synthesizer. John Greaves was on bass. Randy Gunn was on guitar. And my musical partner, David Van Tegan, was on drum and on drum synths. And the music was highly rhythmic. It was driving, but on top of this sort of a noisy groove, you would have a combination of really sweetness and sweet melodies. Then it would go sour. So I could say, in one sense, melodic harmonics, sweet and sour, with a dense groove. This was a four-piece band, was part of a tour, started out in Geneva, actually, spent a couple of weeks in the studio, and then a second set of recording sessions in Geneva. I just found a little notebook which has all of the receipts from that tour. It says Lolo, January, February 1981. For example, it has 50 guilders on February 9th to John, another 22 guilders, cabs to Rotterdam, and the bar bills for the musicians' hotels, as well as listing how much we made, how much we had to spend on the trains and the tickets and the reservations, and the stories really follow the money because it can be quite revealing. But it was London is a very demanding audience. You can every town, certainly every culture, has its own idiosyncrasies, and especially in 1981, music was very much, it was a badge you wore. It was your identity, it was your politics, and you were committed to a type of music, and that music defined who you were. We were, in one sense, messing things up because where I came from a musical place where I was really trying to break down these boundaries of genre and boundaries of style, and really to make how can I say make pop music a little smarter and make art music less elitist. And that's what we were doing with the Love of Life Orchestra.
Thank you, Peter, for taking your time to share your memories on the podcast. 24 hours later, and my head is still ringing with concussion. After the car crash, an ambulance took me to St Thomas's Hospital, where I was examined, diagnosed, and told not to travel until Monday. I checked back into the same hotel and watched Heart to Heart. The mixing of our new single happens without me. I think about the Americans, now heading off on a European adventure. Their can-do attitude, their effortless cool, their stunning musicianship. They make it all look so easy. Monday morning, and England is covered by a blanket of snow. I go home to Mum and Dad, my safe Sheffield home. Crisp cotton sheets and hot meals. I'm the youngest of 3, still getting spoiled rotten. Hi, Mum. Hello, love. Did you have a nice time? Yes, thanks. I was in a car crash, but I met some lovely Americans. What's for tea? You have been listening to My Life in the Mosh of Ghosts with me, your host, Roger Quayle. Thank you to Richard Barone, thank you to Peter Gordon, and thanks as always to Rionagh for the artwork and Simon for the intro and outro music. Join me again next time for another episode from My Life in the Mosh of Ghosts. This is Roger Quayle saying thanks for listening and bye-bye.